Today I will be showing you the threaded stitch, also known as a threaded cable. The threaded stitch, also known as threaded cable, is a stitch technique that results in a cable-like stitch. These are very similar to crossed stitches, where one stitch crosses over another, or like a one-by-one cable. But the difference is the stitch that is crossing envelops the other stitch. They are not crossed one on top of the other. They are crossed through each other. One stitch comes through the other stitch. And this can be performed with one or more stitches doing the threading and one or more stitches being threaded. This is an example of a right thread. The left stitch completely envelops this the stitch that's leaning to the left, and it has a visible right lean to it. It's a very cable-like looking stitch. Only one leg of this stitch is visible because the other leg is wrapping around and behind this stitch that's leaning to the left. And then this is a left leaning or a left threaded stitch. The stitch that was on the right is wrapping around the stitch that was on the left that is now leaning to the right. It has a very visible left lean to it. Only one leg of this stitch is visible because the other leg is behind, wrapping around. Here's another example. This is a one stitch doing the threading, with two stitches being threaded through, and a yarn over is used to keep the stitch count the same. This is a stitch that is used in my sock pattern that will be out in the fall 2018 issue of Cast On magazine. So let me show you these and a couple other examples of some threaded stitches. I'll work a few stitches, and then if I wanted to do a right threaded stitch, I have to almost very similar to cabling without a cable needle, but we're going to pick up the right hand leg of this second stitch and we're going to lift it over the first stitch, but keep it on the needle. And then I'm going to reposition my needle to knit into that stitch, and then I'm going to knit into the next stitch. And this threaded that second stitch over the first stitch and made a right thread stitch. Then if I want to make a left, to make it look the mirror image of this, first we have to slip the first stitch knitwise and slip it back purlwise. And then we need to reach through that first stitch and grab the right leg of the second stitch and pull it through, very similarly to working the Icelandic bind off. Work only that leg, separate these two stitches, drop that one off, and then knit through the back loop of the one that had threaded across. And we now have our left thread stitch. And there's no standard terminology or even chart notation for these stitches, so they might be called any number of names. In the principles of knitting, they are called threaded stitches. There's the left and there's the right. The stitch that is in my sock pattern I'm calling a 1/3 threaded cable, and how you work that is you get to your stitch location, you grab the third stitch from the end and you pull it over, and it helps to work on the tips and anchor those stitches. You pull it over and off the needle so it doesn't get worked. It's just threaded over, and then you knit the first stitch, yarn over, knit the second stitch. So we've created kind of like a fake little cable looking stitch. So I've purled back. Another kind of type of these kind of stitches is to have multiple stitches doing the threading. So say we want to do a 6-stitch threaded cable. That would be 3 stitches over 3 stitches. So this is going to be difficult on these needles, so I'm going to do them one at a time. So you have to lift that stitch over and work it. Without splitting the yarn. So one has been threaded over and worked. It helps to work these stitches loosely. Sometimes patterns will have you elongate these stitches leading up to working these. So 2 and 3, and I will work it. And then I work the last 3. Very tight, but there we go. And it creates a cable-like stitch. Here. 3 threaded over 3. So you can have any combination of stitches being lifted over the other stitches, but yeah, so they are not very commonly used, but they're very interesting and can create some really nice looks and textures in knitting patterns. So those are threaded stitches or threaded cables. Thanks for watching.